Yes, as the song says, we do it all for the glory of the risen King. It's wonderful. This morning we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 4. We are in that time of year where we're approaching Easter, which is the day in which we really set apart the celebration of the resurrection of the King. And Jesus, he conquered the grave, and he rose again. And we really celebrate that throughout the year. That's Christians gather together on Sunday instead of Saturday, which is when the Jews gathered together, because Jesus rose again on the first day of the week. He rose on a Sunday. And even within the pages of the New Testament, we see that the Christians began meeting on the first day of the week, and it was because of this celebration of the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And so Easter is kind of like a weekly thing for us. I mean, it's an exciting, when something like that happens, you celebrate it. It's like, these guys, Jesus died, and with him, as they watched from a distance, the Bible kind of says everybody scattered, but some of them watched from like a far distance. It's like, the Romans aren't going to see me, the chief priests aren't going to see me, but I'm watching. And then maybe they thought maybe something great was going to happen. He was going to come off the cross and just do a little kung fu panda on the Romans and the chief priests, and boom, victory. But he died. So what the? We just invested our whole lives in this guy. We left our businesses. We left our families. We left everything. We followed it. He's dead. I cannot even really imagine how crushed they must have felt. But then all of a sudden, that first day of the week, he was alive. And it took him a while to kind of figure this out. And Thomas, it took a little while longer because he wasn't even there the first time that Jesus showed up and revealed himself to everybody. And we like to give Thomas a hard time, but the man was crushed. His dreams were gone. And people don't just walk out of the grave. Yeah, sure, they'd seen Jesus raise people from the dead, but who was there to raise Jesus? No one. But then even he became convinced. So you're going to celebrate that. You're going to celebrate that. But this morning I want to back up just a little bit and look at just what that resurrection really means. Because when we think about the resurrection, the first thing that we have to realize is that Jesus died. And we have to realize that Jesus died because we have to really understand a truth in Scripture that started in Genesis chapter 3 when Adam and Eve sinned, and God said, He told them, in the day that you disobey me and eat that forbidden fruit, you will die. Now, they didn't have any concept of what he meant by that. They'd never seen death. The unfortunate circumstance for us is that they went ahead and disobeyed, even though they were warned, and now we all know death way too well. We're all too familiar with it. This morning we're going to look at what death is like. We're going to look at the reality of death in our world. We're going to look at what it does to us, but not only what it does to us, but I want us to look deeper into this horrible idea of death, and I want us to see that in the midst of death, there is hope. And so we're going to read in 2 Kings chapter 4. We're going to begin in verse 18. And as we come to this, a little background. In 2 Kings chapter 4, the prophet Elisha has met this woman and her husband in his travels, and he apparently kind of traveled by their place a number of times, but early on they invited him in to their home. They showed hospitality, and they actually, the husband and it seems like at the wife's request, built a room for the prophet and put a little table and a chair and a bed in there. So I mean, he had his own little private place so that every time he traveled through, he had some place to stay, some place to work, some place to, write out his scrolls and all this. And so one day on one of the visits, he wanted to know what the family would like, what this husband and wife would like. And they never really gave him an answer, but his servant was kind of able to ask around apparently, and came up with this idea of, the woman has no son, and her husband is old. And so it's likely that they'll never have children. And so Elisha calls her in and says, essentially, this is kind of a paraphrase, because of your kindness to me, God is going to bless you with a son. And at first, of course, as happens a lot in Scripture, this is funny, she didn't believe him. But verse 17 says that the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. And so this is where we pick up the story in verse 18. So when the child was grown, and we're not told just how grown this is, just it wasn't a baby. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father, to the reapers. He said to his father, my head. And he said to his servant, carry him to his mother. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return. He said, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said to him, it will be well. And then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God, to Mount Carmel. When the man of God saw her at a distance, he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, there is the Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. When she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, and Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me. Then she said, did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, gird up your loins and take your staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him, and if anyone salutes you, do not answer him. And lay my staff on the lad's face. The mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was no sound or response. So he returned to meet him and told him, the lad is not awakened. When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child, and put his mouth on his mouth, and his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up and stretched himself on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. He called Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. So he called her, and when she had come in to him, he said, take up your son. Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground. And she took up her son and went out. I admit to a little concern, trepidation, if you will, about this particular subject. Because death is such an uninviting subject to talk about, even for believers. Because it brings up so many negative feelings. It's not a lighthearted, it's not a fun subject, and oftentimes it's really contained to funerals is when we really talk about it. and it's a lot of times it's because of these negative feelings. We just get mad. Death just, I don't know about you, death makes me angry. I'm the type of guy that I love action movies, I love explosions, I love all kinds of stuff. But death in a movie, even when I know it's pretend, it can get to me sometimes. I love the comic book movies, but I also don't, because so many just masses of people die so needlessly, so mindlessly. And I love the stories. I hate that aspect, and I get mad. I get angry. Why does death have that effect on us? And it might not have that effect on you when you're watching a movie, but normally, death has that effect on people. And I suspect that it's not just the grief process. I think that we feel death is unfair. It's not right. That in some way it's not normal. It messes with us. And yet it's all around us. And we all understand that we're gonna die. I mean, unless Jesus returns before our death and we don't have to face it. The reality is we know we're gonna have to face it. Either in ourselves or people around us. Death is just, we know it's normal, but somehow it doesn't feel normal. So how can we feel this way? And even the Bible in Hebrews 9:27 says, it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Well, part of why it doesn't feel right to us is because even though it is a part of the world in which we live, it's not supposed to be that way. Death is not really actually supposed to be a part of the human experience. You got to go back to Adam and Eve and discover this. They weren't supposed to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but there was another tree that they could have, should have, wish they would have eaten, and that's the tree of life. But they chose the wrong tree. They ate the wrong fruit. And now we have to deal with this. So how can we live in this world with a hope in the redemption that Jesus has brought to us when we still have to face death of loved ones, death of friends, our own death one day? So in this account in 2 Kings chapter 4, we can really dig into it, and we can discover that we need to allow God's grace to infiltrate the grief that we experience and bring us hope. We really have to open ourselves up and allow God's grace to infiltrate into these experiences that we have. Because God's grace will give us a new understanding of death. Now, as we look at this passage, the Bible is pretty straightforward and accurate when it's talking about death. You know, death is an enemy that can strike at any time. We see that in this account. Now, interestingly, we read in verse 17 of 2 Kings 4 about the fact the child was born. Verse 18 is right after it. So it jumps right from the birth of the child to the account of his death. There's no childhood memories. There's no sentimental sharings, a little scrapbook type thing. There's really nothing to build any kind of connection with the child. It's just he's born and boom, he's dead. I mean, that's pretty abrupt. And I don't know about you, but even though there's no sentimental sharings and there's no backstory and all this, that movies and books love to do this because they want to draw you in, they want to connect you to a person, and then kill them off. Because they really, and I've read about this because I like to write, so I read about writing, and writers really, honestly, they do this on purpose. They want to rip your heart right out. Why? Because it sells, really, is the bottom line of it. But I mean, it really gets to you. And so they like to give you backstory. Well, there's no backstory here, but I don't know about you. The first time I ever read this account in 2 Kings chapter 4, I was struck. It's like, he's already dead. Poor kid. You know, death is that way. I mean, it just strikes. Sometimes unexpectedly, just boom. Sometimes without any warning, sometimes without any explanation. You know, I was reading in the commentaries, they really don't know what happened to this child. There's a lot of theories out there, but some of those theories, some medical doctors go, yeah, well, it could have been this, but it'd be really unusual. Or, yeah, well, it does have the symptoms of this particular type of disease, and I don't even remember what all they were. Sunstroke is a big one, but they said, yeah, it was unusual where they were for sunstroke to really kill anybody, but it's possible. Meningitis was one that I remember reading, and they said, probably not. And a couple other diseases, they're like, well, yeah, it's because really it's the headache is the only symptom we've got. And we know that the child was carried back to his mom and sat on her lap until he died. So it could have been anything. We don't know. See, death doesn't always leave us with an explanation. Death is just an enemy that strikes. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's slow. But anytime, it's devastating. And when I read about this woman losing her son, I'm reminded of in The Lord of the Rings, the two towers, where King Theoden is standing at the grave of his son, and he says, no parent should have to bury their child. And I'm sure that's exactly what this woman is thinking. Because no parent should ever have to bury their child. The king called these evil days when the young perish and the old live on. Death is an enemy that can strike at any time. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. You know, Theoden lost his son in battle. It was quick. He didn't even know about it. If you've read the books or watched the movies, he was kind of out of his mind at the time. He just came back to his senses, and boom, his son was gone. It's pretty quick, devastating for him. But sometimes it's slow. Sometimes you have to watch the person passing. Sometimes you know ahead of time they're going to be gone. In the old television show Alf, I don't know if you remember that one. Oh, silly little funny, like aardvark looking alien. There was a Christmas special, and I don't remember seeing it, but I was reading about it here a while back, and I read about it again this week. In this one episode of Alf goes to this hospital and ends up befriending this 8-year-old girl who is there. And somewhere along the way, he overhears the doctors talking, because he's left the room with the girl, and he overhears the doctor saying, this is going to be the girl's last Christmas. And it turns out she was terminally ill. And so he goes back to the girl, and through the episode, he befriends her even deeper, talks with her. There's one point in which, and you never really see this a lot in Alf, okay? Because Alf is just a goofball. But he actually cries with the girl. And then at the end, he has to have a tearful goodbye, and as as he gets in this car outside the hospital and starts driving away, he turns back and it ends with the little girl waving goodbye for the last time. You see, she's going to die. And throughout the whole episode, you know it's going to happen. And it's a long, drawn-out process. Now, I've lost a lot of people. Some quick, and some slow. Both hurt. Both are bad situations. But both are reflections of reality. The reality is, death can strike any time and take a short time or a long time. Death is an enemy. And because death is our enemy, it's natural to hate it. And the beauty of it is this, okay? When Jesus said, love your enemies, death wasn't one of the enemies he's talking about. He's talking about other people, living beings, okay? Death, there's nothing to love because there's no one. Death isn't a person and it's not a personality. It's just our enemy. So it's natural. We're just not going to like it. And some may question calling death an enemy, especially since it's not a person, but Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15:26, the last enemy that will be abolished is death. So death is our enemy, and it's okay to see it that way. It's okay to dislike it. It's okay to be happy that one day it's going to be done away with. That one day we're not going to have to face it anymore. One day it's going to be gone. See, it's already been defeated. The war against death has already been done. It's just it hasn't been totally annihilated yet. It's kind of like the end of World War II. I mean, the end had come before the cessation of hostilities was finalized. And the way wars are run, it's like, you know, you have to sign on the dotted line before people quit shooting at each other. So even though it's over, there's still the aftermath until the final signature is signed. And the promise is that one day, it's, you know, God's going to sign on the dotted line. It's going to end. The final signature is going to be put on the paper or whatever, metaphorically speaking, and death will be abolished. It's going to be done. It's going to be brought to an end. It's going to be rendered inoperative. It's not going to do anything anymore. It's not even going to exist. In other words, it won't be able to strike anybody anymore. Now that's still in the future, but that's the hope that we hold to. That's the hope that we can hold to when we are faced with the reality of death. Is that it's going to end one day. It will stop. But until that happens, we do have to face it. And we have to face the reality that death creates a flurry of emotions in us. You know, there are a number of emotions that are part of the grief process. And that's what psychologists call, anytime there's any kind of loss, whether it's death or any kind of loss, there's the grief process, and they've identified 5 stages of grief, which it's not always a chronological order, and it doesn't always go in the same order, but there's 5 phases that we all go through when we're grieving, and if you never go through all 5 of them, then you never actually grieve. You never get through the grief. And this is kind of a hang-up for a lot of people. And these phases are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. Now, when we look at this account of the mother losing her child, and I keep coming back to the mother because the dad had no idea. You know, last he knew, kid was sick, take him to his mother, she'll fix him. She hid the kid and kept telling everybody, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. That kind of sounds like denial to me. It's not okay. The kid's dead. You put him in the prophet's bedroom. I'm not really sure what she was thinking. Some people might say, well, she obviously knew that the prophet would raise him from the dead. Did she know that? Because when she showed up to him, she seemed kind of upset. Did I ask for a kid? She blames the poor guy. He just told her, God's going to give you a child. And at the time, like I said, she didn't believe him. It was kind of, yeah, right. Don't lie. Don't deceive me. It's like, no. By the time I come next year, you're going to have a son. Well, guess what? She did. And it was all grand and happy when it happened. But now it's like, why'd you do this to me? So we see denial, we see anger, we see some bargaining going on here, don't we? Because she's like, I'm not leaving you, prophet, until something happens. You're going to fix this. What'd she expect? I don't know. Did she expect her child to be brought back to life? I don't know. Maybe there was a hope deep down that the child really wasn't dead. And honestly, some people are like, why did Elisha give his staff to Gehazi and send Gehazi on to lay the staff on the kid's face? I mean, nothing happened. And Gehazi comes back and says, nothing happened. The kid didn't wake up. Well, what it appears to me is Gehazi was sent ahead to see, is the kid really dead? It's kind of like in The Princess Bride, is he fully dead, or is he just mostly dead? What kind of dead are we talking about here? Well, it turns out this guy is fully dead. Because the prophet's staff, nothing. I mean, tap the child, shake him. I don't know what all Gehazi did, but he's like, he did not wake up. He's gone. He's gone. And then the mother's like, I'm sticking with you until this is resolved. So we see in her all these emotions, this just turmoil of emotions. And we all experience those. We all experience it. Now the problem with emotions is that if we're not careful, emotions can begin to rule us. Emotions can begin to control us. Emotions can take control, and when that happens, bad things happen. For example, Captain Ahab in the story Moby Dick. The man didn't really work through his emotions. He just let his emotions drive him. And, I mean, the end of that story is everyone except Ishmael dies. Everybody. It's like, all because Ahab just, wouldn't work through whatever he was grieving. I mean, he was obviously upset and angry, and he didn't work through these things. He just let his anger drive him. Insanity. And it led to death and destruction for everybody. Well, that's not a good ending. That's not the path we want to go down. We don't want our emotions to control us. Others, such as a doctor that I once met, were angry at God over the death of a younger sibling. And this happened years ago. But they held on to the anger. Now the problem with holding on to anger and holding on to these things and allowing these emotions to drive the bus is it will never drive you to where you want to be. The doctor wasn't exactly the happiest camper in the world. The doctor was still angry over something that happened years ago. And what happens when we get angry? Well, a lot of people look for somebody to blame. The Shunammite woman was blaming the prophet. Ahab was blaming the whale. The doctor's blaming God. Now let's be honest, God is an easy target. God is, it's like, boom. You're a big target, you're an easy target, boom, I blame you. A lot of people do it. I think we probably all do it at some point in our lives to one extent or another. so we see this flurry of emotions in this mother. But we also see she's not just letting the emotions run wild. Yes, she's acting in her desperation. She's acting, kind of being moved along by these emotions, but they never take control of her. Because through this entire thing, through this entire incident, she is holding on to hope. She's still seeking God and looking for God to do something. I'm not sure she knew what she was looking for him to do. She just knew that God had the answer. That's why she went to Elisha, God's prophet, God's servant. In the Old Testament times, you had to go to a prophet or a priest or somebody that God had designated in order to have access to him. And so she's going to the prophet, kind of blaming him, but at the same time saying, do something. Let God do something. And I'm not leaving until I see what it is. You know what? There's nothing wrong with getting a little worked up, with getting a little emotional. There's nothing wrong with going to God and saying, you know, I'm kind of upset about this. Read through the book of Psalms. Read through the book. There's a lot of times where the writer of the psalm is saying, what are you doing? What's going on? So you see, we don't have to get over our anger or our disappointment before we go to God, because he can handle it. He's big enough. He can take care of it. He can take a few hits from us. He can take some things. But we need to go to him. And when we go to him, we find out that death really is not the end. You know, this is one of many accounts of someone in the Bible being raised back to life. But all of these are just a reminder to us that death does not have the final say. We have hope in the promise that one day death will be conquered and we will all rise from the dead. And these accounts of these individuals being brought back to life throughout history, that's God's way of reminding us of this promise and showing us that yes, it can happen. And yes, it will. In John 5:28-29, Jesus said, "Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." So we're all going to experience resurrection. We're all going to be brought back to life. Death will end. And when death ends, then all of the victories that it apparently had are going to be undone. But when Jesus says this, we're all going to rise, but you know, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment, is he saying that if we do good, and if our good deeds outweigh our bad deeds, then somehow that's the criteria that he's going to judge us by, that we get into heaven by doing good? Because I mean, that's what he said, right? Well, not exactly. If you back up just a couple verses, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life." So you see, when he's talking about doing good, he's not talking about your good deeds. He's talking about believing God. He's talking about having faith in God. He's talking about believing what God has said. Now, what does that mean? What are we exactly supposed to believe when Jesus says to believe him who sent me? Well, in the very next chapter, in John chapter 6, verses 28-29, we see this little Q&A session going on. And it says that therefore they said to him, being Jesus, "What shall we do so that we may work the works of God?" And Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." See, the whole thing here, the whole thing, is that Jesus is revealing that he has done what is necessary for us to receive eternal life. He has taken care of it. So what's required of us is that we have faith in him. Understand, that's the only requirement. But when you have faith in him, understand too, it's going to transform your life. And you will become ambassadors for him. So your life is going to reflect what he has done for you. Now this message is vital, both for us and for our community, because without Jesus there's no hope. Death apart from Jesus really is a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing. It's a terrifying thing. And so we need to take this seriously and be willing to truly live out lives that reflect our calling to be ambassadors of Christ to the world around us. We know that there is no hope outside of Jesus, and we know that people really do need hope. Right now especially, it seems that people are losing hope in just about everything. But Jesus is the answer to this. And we have the great privilege of being able to bring that news to them. Death is our enemy, but it's a defeated enemy. Jesus gets the final victory, and all who place their faith in him will receive the victory as well. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the victory that you've given us. We thank you, Father, that death is not the final say. And we thank you for the hope that you've given us. And we thank you for the privilege of being able to share that hope with others. I pray, Father, that we would be faithful in sharing the hope that you've given to us with the people that you bring across our paths. For it's in Jesus' name I pray.